Say what you want about American Chinese food, I would argue it's its own cuisine. Once you get past the classic complaints of it's not authentic and it's so unhealthy, the snobbish distaste towards boxed Chinese food at the mall is wholly undeserved. Who doesn't enjoy a plate of fast food noodles with a side chosen from a very nearly infinite menu of deep-fried chicken tossed in chili peppers, cashews, or, heavens forbid, oranges? The paragon of American Chinese cuisine is the fortune cookie. Terribly unhealthy and definitely not Chinese at all, but it's sweet and crunchy with a message inside that can be taken with a lighthearted laugh. There's nothing to dislike about that. I worked a summer job in Houston where the Chinese restaurant at the local mall served every boxed meal with a house-made fortune cookie. The store had a little glass window in its kitchen where a college-aged part-timer sat, whipping meringue for the batter and handwriting fortunes with a blue ballpoint pen while the cookies baked in the oven behind him. Sometimes I could see his manager standing at the stove off to the side, tossing a pan of noodles and glancing through the glass at the waiting customers. The restaurant was my go-to when I didn't want to cook dinner or when I needed an excuse to walk around the mall after a particularly dull day at work. They offered deliveries, but I enjoyed the bustle of the mall. And besides, the food would be cold by the time it arrived at my house. My favorite order was chow mein with a side of General Tso's chicken, though sometimes I switched it up with fried wontons. After my meal, I would break open the fortune cookie and read some charmingly inconsequential fortune the part-timer behind the glass window had written. One day, I broke open the cookie and saw a message that was longer than usual. It was written in a tiny, cramped handwriting to fit it all into one slip of paper. It said something in Chinese.
It means, I love you, but I don't know how to let you know.
My eyes went wide. I looked at the glass window of the kitchen where the part-timer was folding the fortune cookies. He looked up at the same time, and our eyes met, just for a moment. Then he quickly looked down and placed a cookie on his baking tray. I wasn't sure what to do, so for a small while, I watched him work. The cookies came out of the oven in little soft discs, and he placed a fortune on each disc and quickly folded them into the familiar shape. As he lined up the cookies on his baking tray to cool and harden, he looked up at me again. I gave him a small wave. He looked genuinely surprised, and his eyes lit up with a nervous smile. The next time I bought a meal, I cracked open the cookie first. The same cramped handwriting to fit a longer than average message on a small slip of paper greeted me.
You're beautiful, and I hope you know that. I wish you nothing but the brightest of days.
I looked at the window to the kitchen. The part-timer broke into a grin, as if he had discreetly been waiting for me to look his way. I smiled, and his ears turned pink. The fortune cookie messages kept coming. I frequented the restaurant, even more than before. The fortunes were something I looked forward to now.
How was your day? Make a fist to the window, and I'll be looking if I'm not too busy. I wonder what you think of me. If I talk to you, I think I might just ruin it all. I'm writing this while you're not here. I miss you. Sometimes the wall of the kitchen feels like such a distance. I catch glimpses of you from here. It's never enough.
After the last message, I turned over the slip of paper, took out a pen, and wrote my name and phone number on the back of the fortune. And then I walked up to the window to the kitchen and tapped on the glass. The part-timer started and looked up from his work. I held up my message against the window. His eyes widened and he broke into a grin. He quickly pulled an empty slip of paper from a box and copied down my number, knocking over a bottle of vanilla extract in his haste. Oh, his manager walked over from the commotion and scowled at him, and then turned to look at me. I quickly lowered my hands and stuffed the message in my pocket. Something by the stove started smoking. The manager rushed to put out the grease fire, saving both me and the part-timer any further embarrassment. That night, after eagerly awaiting for what felt like hours, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number.
When you told me your name, it occurred to me that you didn't know mine all this time. Hi, I'm Kai.
Kai and I exchanged texts all night and all day, and talked on the phone for hours on end. Even though his words weren't confined to slips of paper inside fortune cookies anymore, Kai's special fortunes I got with my order whenever I ate at the restaurant still made me smile.
I wish you'd look at me more when you eat, but I understand the allure of food, so I forgive you. Sometimes I just wait for you to show up, you know?
Once when I entered the restaurant, I looked at the kitchen window and noticed Kai wasn't there. Before I could wonder where he had gone, the steel door to the kitchen opened and he came out holding 2 cups of ice-cold lemon tea.
I hope you like lemon,
He said, smiling sheepishly.
or else I might have to go back to the kitchen and make something else.
What are you doing? I asked, admittedly flustered, though I wasn't sure why. I realized that I had never seen him standing. He was taller than I expected.
I got out early today. We can have a stupid middle school mall date.
I grinned, took the lemon tea, and jabbed the straw toward the door to the kitchen. Somebody's gonna get in trouble for this. Kai turned just in time to see his manager frowning back at him before the door slipped closed.
Whatever. He's half a step from firing me anyway, for being so distracted.
He raised an eyebrow at me meaningfully, and I laughed.
Come on, let's get out of here. There's better food to be had on our first date.
That evening, with a stuffed rabbit plush from the arcade tucked under my arm and the sweetness of vanilla ice cream on the tip of my tongue, Kai gently leaned me up against the corner of the breezeway and kissed me. I laid awake in bed far past midnight because I couldn't stop thinking about it and smiling. I pulled out my phone and began typing. How do you say I miss you again? In Chinese, I mean. I didn't receive a reply for a few minutes. Just when I decided he must be asleep, my phone lit up.
I don't speak Chinese, actually. My parents do. Maybe I can ask them.
I blinked, and then started typing again. But what about the fortune you wrote that one time?
Fortune?
You wrote, I miss you.
I did? When? Hello? Hello? You awake?
I stared at his messages for a long time. My thumbs moved stiffly. You wrote messages for me in the fortune cookies. It was his turn to go silent. I waited. My heart started to pound a sickening beat. When the messages came, my throat went dry.
The cookies are made days in advance, and all I've ever written in them are horoscopes and lucky numbers. I just put them all in a basket. I don't assemble the meals. The person who does that is my manager.
I stared at my desk, where I had carefully kept all of the fortunes Kai had written for me. My phone started ringing, but I didn't pick up. It rang for a long, long time, and then it stopped. And then it rang again for a shorter while. Then a message appeared.
What has he been writing to you? It's gonna be okay. Whatever happened, I'm gonna help you figure it out, okay?
My hands trembled as I typed. Okay. Do you really think it's him? It has to be okay. He doesn't know my address or anything, right? Do I call the police? Kai? I waited desperately for a response, for some reassurance. I laid in bed and stared blankly at my screen. I waited until fatigue began to take over, until I felt my eyelids grow heavy despite everything, until I fell asleep vaguely wondering why he had stopped talking. The next morning, he was all over the news. The article said that he was found around 5 a.m. by an early morning jogger who noticed the blood on the doorstep to his apartment. He'd been long dead by then. It was murder. The police were searching all over for the perpetrator. The most horrifyingly sensationalized article said his body was found missing, all its teeth. I didn't go to work for days after that. In fact, I didn't set foot outside my house for a good while. I ordered food and watched television and tried not to look at the rabbit plush sitting on my dresser. 2 days in, I couldn't bear its brown doll eyes and I stuffed it underneath my bed. My clueless coworkers messaged me asking where I was, and my boss called me a couple times, but I didn't pick up. They never caught the murderer. A little less than a week into this self-isolation, I heard a knock at my door and got up thinking it was the cheap pasta I had ordered for lunch. When I opened the door, a young woman was standing there with a plastic bag in her hand, but the smell that wafted through the air was not the acidic tang of marinara. "Chow mein and General Tso's chicken," she droned. "Right?" I stared at her like she had turned into the monster of my nightmares. She raised an eyebrow. "Do I have the wrong address?" I kept staring. The woman crossed her arms. "Did you order this or not? The manager said you would know what to do, whatever that means." My hand moved on its own and the deliverer rolled her eyes as I took the bag from her. She left before I could say anything. I closed my door and opened the bag like there might be something terrible inside, but it was the familiar meal, the quintessential American Chinese takeout, complete with a fortune cookie. The fortune cookie. It was slightly lumpy in shape, and at first I thought it was because the manager didn't have the deft hands that Kai did, but after a moment I realized that all my cookies had been folded by the manager, and all those had looked perfect. I picked up the cookie. There was a sickening weight to it, one last warning before I could break it open. I put my thumbs up against the two tips of the cookie and pulled. There was a sharp crack of hardened sugar and meringue breaking at the seam. 3 white teeth bounced onto the table, still flecked with bits of dried blood. Along with them, a slip of paper with tiny cramped handwriting.
"Stop flirting with him. You're supposed to be mine."